Hello, friends. This is Christopher Davis-Shannon, and today I am checking in with the infamous and notorious Drew Nugent. Drew, how you doing?
I'm doing swell.
That's what I like to hear. So you're across town in Philadelphia from me, right?
I am over the bridge.
Yeah, you're on the right side of the river.
Yes. Across the filthy Schuylkill.
That's what I like to hear. Let's kick it off with a tune. What do you say?
Sure. Gee, but it's hard to be broke, dear. It's not a joke, dear. It's a curse. My luck has changed. It has gotten from something rotten to simply worse. Who knows? Who knows? Someday I'll begin to win and reach my prime. But until then, all I can spend, all I can lend, is just my time. I can't give you anything but love, baby. That's the only thing I've plenty of, baby. Dream a while, scheme a while, you're sure to find happiness. And I guess all since your heart been dreaming of skipping, gee, I'd love to see you looking swell. Baby, diamond bracelets, Target doesn't sell. Till that lucky day, you know darn well, baby, I can't give you anything but love. Salt peanuts, salt peanuts. You like that, Dizzy? Broken record. Gee, I'd love to see you looking so well. Diamond bracelets on words doesn't sell. You know darn well, baby, I can't give you anything. I ain't dishing out anything, no. Gotta pay the rent first. I can't give you anything but love you.
That's the good music right there. Is that what that is?
You know that supposedly was written by Fats Waller. I just found out about this recently. That the rumor was that Fats Waller was a good time guy. He loved to go out, which was common knowledge, and but he had a very he spent a lot, and he apparently accrued a heavy debt and sold the song off for a few grand. And was just grumbling about it the whole time. And every time it was requested of him to play it or he heard it, he would just get a bit tense or just get kind of riled, like a little bit annoyed about it.
There were plenty of melodies that are attributed to Fats over the years that he doesn't necessarily have credit for, which is a shame. But speaking of those old jazz guys, you're down in Cater Street in South Philly, I know, which is right around the corner from where Eddie Lang was born. And I bet that a lot of people listening to this have no idea who the great Eddie Lang was. Probably the finest early jazz guitarist out there. Can you tell us a little bit about Mr. Eddie Lang?
Eddie Lang was born Salvatore Massaro on St. Albans Street, right near a historic restaurant that we all like to play at. And this is a big hangout from the politicians to the palookas of the mafia. They all.
Should we mention the restaurant?
We're going to take this part out of the.
Sure.
But there, Eddie Lang was born right around there, as was Joe Venuti. Well, to take that back, Venuti claimed that he was born on on the immigrant steamer coming over to America. He claimed that, and other people claim that he was born here in Philadelphia. Eddie Lang actually started out in his career playing. He could play any instrument. He could play mandolin. He could play a bit of piano. He could play banjo, ukulele, and guitar and violin. And early on, Eddie Lang and Joe Venuti used to switch back and forth doing, one would play guitar, the other would play violin. And then finally, I don't know who told them to kind of stay with it as one on one and one on the other. But that's what they ended up doing. But Eddie Lang really melted these beautiful folkloric Italian themes and movements, and even pieces from the opera, pieces from folk songs, and he would put them in syncopated time format, and they came up with a style that was pretty much South Philly, or it's not really South Philly, it's Queen Village or wherever you want to call it.
Sure. But
it's still wonderful in the sense that it's so singular a style, and it really gave the inspiration to the great Django Reinhardt and Stefan Grappelli.
Certainly.
And I didn't know this, but my good pal Barry Veroftig was telling me this, and that Grappelli originally in the group was playing piano. And on the set breaks, he and Django would go behind the curtain, and that was when Grappelli would whip out the violin, and they would try to do stuff like Eddie Lang and Joe Venuti. And this is before they became a sensation. So it just goes to show you how far the reach was of what Eddie and Joe were doing. One of the most beautiful things that I thought was so, it's just like, wow, who gets this kind of treatment? Especially back then. I mean, only people like Bix and Louis Armstrong got this kind of treatment in arrangements. But there were sections and arrangements from the bands of Paul Whiteman or Roger Wolf Kahn or Gene Goldkett, you name it, the band, they were in it. And there would be a section marked off that would say Eddie and Joe. And there would be nothing written. They didn't want the band in it at all. It just said Eddie and Joe. And it would be, I would say maybe how many measures or whatever. Or
definitely. I know we were working off some of the old Whiteman charts a few years ago. The original charts that they were using in the bandstand, and there's just these blocked off sections of nothingness where the rest of the band drops out, and it's the violin and guitar duets right there. They're already through a range, but unfortunately they're not in the music themselves, so you get to transcribe it off the records, which is much more fun than just reading it off the page.
Yep, it was. They said of Eddie Lang, this is one of my favorite things that I read up about Eddie Lang. It was in the Whiteman Orchestra. They were getting ready, I believe, to do a radio program or something. And Eddie Lang walks off to use the bathroom or something like that. And he leaves this pile of almost index-sized cards with just like little symbols on it, almost like hieroglyphics. And Frankie Trumbauer or somebody comes over and they're looking at it and they're trying to make head or tail of it, and they're turning it around, and Eddie comes back in and just starts laughing because he sees him trying to make sense of it. He's like, "Oh, you'll never figure it out." And they're like, "What do you mean?" He's like, those are my charts." And they said, what do you mean those are your charts? That's how I know where we are. And he's like,
Yeah.
Okay, well, as long as you understand them.
And he certainly did understand. There's no doubt about that.
Paul Whiteman even said that Eddie Lang knew where the band was 8 measures before the band even did. Yeah. He was like Bix or Jack Purvis in that regard, and Purvis was just this freak of nature. And he was one of the few white dudes that was trying to be more like Armstrong rather than Bix in the 20s and 30s. He could also play wicked trombone. The thing, to give you an idea of Jack Purvis's crazy, was he would start out playing lead on trumpet. Then he would be the soloist, which is usually given to the second, either third or fourth, depending on how many you have, trumpet or cornet player. Then he would run over to the vocal mic with the trio, and they'd sing. He'd be one of the voices in the trio or the vocal quartet. Hell, if the lead didn't show up, he would sing a lead maybe. Then if they felt like giving it to him, he'd pick up the trombone and he would play a quick trombone solo that would just knock your socks off. And he'd finish off on trumpet. Maybe doing another trumpet solo muted or something. That's how prodigious he was. And while in jail, he taught himself piano. Claimed he learned more in jail than he ever did outside in the world. And he had his own band in jail that actually performed on the radio in the 30s. No really? Joke. He had an on-the-air band in prison during the 30s because he was always going to jail for like robbery or petty theft or some nonsense like that. Right.
Those dirty jazz musicians, you can't trust them. That's just what
can't.
It is.
True story.
Even to this day.
Oh, you can't. You can't. Every time they would arrive in a town, like he was with Fred Waring or something, and they said anytime he would arrive in a town with an orchestra, the number of burglaries and thefts and whatnot in the town just spiked. Like, next job.
Just comes along with good music, that's all.
And Eddie was like the polar, and Venuti was the same way. Venuti was just an outright nut. He loved to prank people, whereas Eddie was this like gentleman, laid back as they came. Lonnie Johnson, when they recorded together, they did these remarkable blues recordings with Lonnie on his 12-string guitar and Eddie on that beautiful arch.
Yeah, and I'll link to those recordings down in the description on this video as well, because those are some of my favorite guitar duos. Yeah,
they were just, I mean, the energy flowing back and forth between the two of them was just magnificent. And even after it was all over and done with, Lonnie Johnson was like, he's just the coolest. He's such a gentleman. He's just a pleasure to work with. Like, we couldn't help but just make this. This flew out of us. Certainly. And I think, the stuff he did with Venuti, though, is the most iconic. Their small group, even their appearances in the Roger Wolf Kahn Orchestra, Goldcat, Whiteman, you name it. They're to me, the stuff that was just so vibrant and full of color was this small group stuff they did with Don Murray, who would be, and even Adrian Rollini and Jimmy Dorsey, who would all be doubling on every instrument they could think of. Like, Dorsey was, much like Benny Goodman, they were multi-instrumentalists, and they could play the reeds, they could play trumpet, they could play a bit of piano, they would make sure that they earned their keep in these bands, That's how crazy it was. There's actually recordings I was listening to recently of Ben Pollock's band with young Benny Goodman. And right before Jimmy McPartland goes into his solo, there's a 2-bar riff that you're like, wait a minute, was that a different trumpet player? Because it was a very Bixian, almost kind of a rip. And it was Benny Goodman. For 2 measures, he just picked up the horn, did the, and then Jimmy McPartland takes it. And you have to show me that recording. I don't know that one. It was like woodwork. And then Benny Goodman stays on trumpet for the rest of the record, joining the trumpet section as a trio for this wicked. Benny was a genius. It's a shame he didn't stay a multi-instrumentalist through the rest of his career, because I get it. The public knew him as a clarinet player. His manager, John Hammond, was like, yo, dude, you're staying a clarinet player. Like, same thing with Fred Astaire. He wanted to be considered a serious songwriter. He was a magnificent piano player and singer, and he wanted to become a composer. And the people that were the powers that be for him said, no, you stay to the dancing and the singing, maybe, but the dancing, you're a dancer. And my heart goes out to like guys like that. Like, what? And you're just gonna take that? Well, it's the Depression. What are you gonna do? Like,
right. And it's a shame that we don't see more of that. The multi-instrumentalists and multimedia artists these days, the people that can sing, can dance, can play piano, can play drums, can play horn. And that was almost just a prerequisite back in the day.
It was.
So many entertainers. You weren't expected to be a singular instrumentalist. You were expected to entertain in any way possible. And that was something that I think we've kind of lost over the years, which is really a huge shame.
Like, remember they used to have pianos that were smaller than mine. This one's, I would say, a 41-incher.
Yeah, well, I have one of the old little spinets here, one of the Lesters made in Philly, which is substantially smaller than yours. And then, then we have the Tom Thumb pianos as well.
I love that. Bob Rollins, shout out to the great Bob Rollins.
Of course, Doc Rollins knows one of them.
He wrote that book. I love Bob Rollins. That book he wrote, Tunes of the 20s and all that.
Yeah, I was just reading some of it last night, actually.
We're mentioning it. My band's mentioning it, I'm proud to say. He says to me, he's like, "Oh, I want you to be in the book." I'm like, "Why?" He's like,
yeah, it's a phenomenal resource for people that love those old tunes. Just the history behind all those songs, which is so important, really, to I think performing them with any semblance of relevancy is actually understanding the tune and the cultural relevance that it came out of.
And wonderful instrumentalist and instrument collector, for that matter. He said to me,
yes,
because I got a Tom Thumb piano, and I'm like, "Get out!" He's like, "Yeah, we're not using it, and if you want it, it's yours." And I'm like, the thing is, though, now I'm trying, once we're through this batch of crazy, I'm really hoping to, devise something to transport it around with, little money spent.
I'm just saying, you're riding your little scooter around town with a Tom Thumb piano behind you.
Oh, yeah. I would, but I want to be able to figure out a way to get it to gigs, because it's just such a singular instrument. And that's what they were meant for, was transporting.
We moved one a few months ago with some of my bandmates, and those darn things are as heavy as a regular upright piano. It's incredible. I thought we were getting into something easy, and those things are still damn near 300 to 400 pounds.
About 400 to 500 pounds.
Yeah, absolutely incredible. I didn't know what we were getting into. That was harder to get up the steps than my spinet.
It's crazy. I actually lost out on an opportunity to get one of these, because I didn't know what it was at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But during World War II, Steinway made all these service pianos that were like about the size of mine, I believe, maybe a bit smaller or bigger. I don't remember. But all I know is they were sent overseas, and they were like these solid freaking pianos that the servicemen were using. I'm like, now that's, hey, if it was good enough for the Army and Steinway made it.
Yeah.
Like,
there's old Alcoa basses as well that were originally made for sailors, so that they didn't have to worry about the humidity problems. They're going to hold up. Berkeley students were riding them down the river as canoes in the 70s, and some of those were still rescued after that. Drew, could I get you to play us another tune here?
I would love that. get my love. Nobody but my baby is worth thinking of. I'm yelling, I'm telling the whole world too. Nobody but my baby hears me when I'm blue. I'm crazy about my baby, she's my turtle dove. I ain't lying, why would I? Her arms fit me like a glove. Some folks say love is blind, but I'm one man that knows it's mine. Nobody but my baby is getting my love. Nobody but my baby is getting my love. Nobody but my sweet, sweet baby is worth thinking of. I'm yelling, I'm telling the whole world too. Nobody but my baby cheers me when I'm blue. So I'm crazy about my baby, she's my turtle dove. I ain't lying, her arms, they fit me like a glove. Some folks say love is blind, but I'm one man who knows it's mine. Nobody but my baby is getting my love.
What was the name of that tune, Drew, for all the people listening out there?
The first part of it was something I just went off into La La Land with, because that's just what happens with Silly Brain. And
It's a terrible affliction.
I know, right? The second part of that was written by the great Clarence Williams, who I love to give honorable mention to every time I say his name, because Clarence Williams Jr. was one of the greatest men in business. And he was one of the first African-American dudes to like really rock the music world and kind of make jazz and blues really way more accessible and really bring it to the public, you know, in publishing houses and creating, you know, records with all sorts of like magnificent stars of jazz and blues, from like Bessie Smith to Sidney Bechet, Louis Armstrong, you name it, they played with him. And he was a pretty damn good piano player, but his real prowess came in the publishing business. And he wrote that tune. But the thing is, I always say wrote kind of like openly, because it's
right.
It's very good chance that it was somebody else's and they sold it to him and it's now his. And like that's the whole story about Louis Armstrong supposedly wrote "I Wish I Could Shimmy Like My Sister Kate."
Sure. Yeah.
And I wouldn't, I've never, and I don't know Louis Armstrong, sadly, and I've got to know him personally, but he just never seemed like a cat to have to lie about things.
Right. But there was so much of that going on during the 20s and 30s in the publishing boom of just, you know, "You Are My Sunshine" by Jimmy Davis. You know, things such as that.
And you look at stuff like the Tiger Rag and the Hesitation Blues.
Of course, yeah.
This is to me like the conversation that, like, when I get into it with my fellow jazz nerds, and if they happen to be from New Orleans, sometimes it gets heated. Because to me, everybody's like, oh, New Orleans invented jazz. Blah, it was created here. I'm like, well, no, jazz was an evolution. New Orleans happened to have pretty much the most musicians and musical families per capita, and a really huge cultural melting pot of all different musics at the same time as well. And they contributed greatly, like possibly the most significantly out of all the cities that were, helping with the evolution of jazz. But you can't rule out all the other cities.
Of course.
There was so many scenes. I mean, look at the claims on who invented boogie woogie. Some people even went so far as to say it was invented in logging camps in Nebraska and things like that.
And we all know nothing good was invented in Nebraska, so that's obviously a lie.
Get a clue.
Drew, you've got a couple records out that I will link down in the description of this video so people can hear you. But I have always thought the best way to hear you play is to hear you play live.
I agree. Recording is such a beast, and I enjoy it more now than I used to. It used to really set me on edge, and I think in some of my recordings it's probably a little bit apparent. But I think that there's you get older and the more you do this, and the more it just becomes kind of a
and you learn the way that you have to address it differently than a live performance. It's really just a totally different art form that people take for granted. What we're doing in the studio is not necessarily exactly what we're doing on stage, unless we're really lucky and have a great live room and an amazing band and arrangements already done and can cut everything live. But still, it's a different experience, and it definitely weighs on the performer a bit more.
And your OCDs tend to come out more like the fastidiousness of, well, I want it to be like this, and it's like, now I want to do, it's like, because you have the option of doing that, whereas in the performance, it's like, 1, 2, 3, here we go, Hail Mary, away!
And what happens, and that's the joy. And now you've started live streaming performances, Thursday through Saturday each week, right?
Yeah.
Are you doing that just on Facebook?
Yeah, well, it's because what was it, the week of the 15th into the 20th or whatever, I just was flabbergasted at how much work I was just losing by the day. And, notification after notification coming through, an email, call, text, you name it, Facebook, friggin' Messenger. And they're like, oh, I won't name the venues, but my favorite was that one venue says, okay, we're postponing it to this. Then we're postponing it to that. And okay, no, it's indeterminably.
Yeah, I had a few of those myself. So we'll push it back 2 weeks or 2 months, or maybe we'll talk in the fall.
And I don't mind. I mean, I'm just grateful that they're postponements and not we're given the kicking the pants out the door.
Sure. I mean, it's nothing we can really do anything about right now. So adaptation is key. So I think the online concerts and having that digital tip jar out there is a great way to do it. And you're also getting to spread the joy of this wonderful old music to a much wider audience at that point.
The thing that makes me so happy, because I correspond with a lot of people all over the world in places I haven't even gotten to play yet. And this makes me happy in that I can bring it from my living room to theirs.
And
have one big house party.
Yeah, it's kind of that middle ground between recordings and performance themselves when we're doing something like these live streams. It's without the audience, you don't have that personal interaction. So you lay closer to sitting in a recording studio, but it's still one take. This is what you get, which is the beautiful part of performance in and of itself.
You're practicing on, and I just, for me, I didn't even throw the tip sign up on the first night. I just did it, and all of a sudden, like in the comment feed, like there were so many comments of people saying, "Where do we send money? What's your Venmo?
Yeah.
What's your PayPal? Do you have Cash App? Do you have this? Do you have that?" And I was like, "Oh, didn't really think about that." And
right. You're doing this for your own catharsis. It's only people want to pay you for it.
It's so remiss to me. It's so remiss of me to do that, because that's my job on a daily basis.
Yeah.
To put the tip bucket out.
It's the changing times.
I guess it was the disconnect of not having a physical tip bucket, and there's nobody here.
Yeah.
So that's what started it. And seeing my mug on the screen used to just freak me, and it still does. I mean, I'm getting used to it. It's, again, things you get used to and adapting. But I'm like, oh God, it's like, I don't
Who's
want
that
this. And but the next night I put an even cruder sign than this up. Like, this is like the Little Rascals. Our gang was here. Like, all we need is some backwards.
Yeah, no girls allowed.
Anyway, I've made a half decent amount. I've made nothing close to what I've lost, but it's given me hope, and it's kept me going. And I mean, luckily now they can't. Being in Pennsylvania, they can't throw us out. But I still don't want to be that guy that can't pay his rent, because I've been able to pay my rent being a full-time musician for over a decade now.
Yeah, and it's good to see people still supporting the arts so much in this time, and especially independent artists, you know, that don't have a whole support system of a label behind them or management or anything like that. Those independent artists, they're the ones that are playing all around town for everyone every day, and who you're enjoying. So it's important that people are still supporting them at a time like this. Drew, can I trouble you for one last tune?
I will. That'd be great. I just wanted to say that I feel bad because I've also gotten messages, you know, because I make sure to thank everyone. I was the way I was raised, and
yeah.
It's just what you do. You don't sit there like Scrooge McDuck and be like, mine, like, here it is. And I got some responses to my thank yous from people saying, we're really sorry we can't send more, and blah, blah, it's getting harder for us. I'm like, no, do not feel bad about that. The fact that you thought of me speaks volumes, and it really just means the world to me. And the fact that you're tuning in and people are saying, I'm doing this every weekend, I'm listening to Drew's show, and I'm like, it's touching. Like, yeah,
certainly.
Here's a little tune from Fats Waller. So if you're having a drink, take a fat swallow of it, even if it's fizzy water. I can swing along through anything if skies are sunny and blue, just as long as the world moves round and around, and I go around with you. I can smile through every weary mile. I know I'll always pull through, just as long as the world goes round and round, and I go around with you. You are the bow and the fiddle, playing the strings of my heart. There'll be no songs worth singing should we ever part. Life would be the sweetest melody, a song of love that is true, just as long as the world goes round and around, and I go around with you. Get yourself on there, get yourself on there. Swing along to anything if skies are sunny and blue, just as long as the world goes round and around, I go around with you. I can smile through every weary mile. Oh, I always pull through, baby, as long as the world goes round and round, I go around with you. You are the boy and the fiddle, playing the strings of my heart. There'll be no song worth singing
Drew, thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to join me and chat and play some tunes. I greatly appreciate it.
I don't know if I told you this. One last Eddie Lang factoid.
Yeah.
I think everybody of the world would enjoy was that Eddie Lang did not really hold vices. He wasn't a heavy drinker, wasn't into drugs. He smoked cigarettes very heavily, from what I'm told. But he loved to go fishing, loved to go play basketball, and he loved gambling, whether it was betting on horses, playing pool, or playing cards. He was adept at all three. And they said, anybody who knew him, that he made more money gambling than he ever did playing music, which is insane to think about, considering at the end of his life, he was making upwards of $15,000 a week. And that's in 1933. And people who were new to the gang, when they said they were going to go play cards with Eddie Lang, people looked at him and they're like, you're crazy. You're crazy. And Venuti, who was a terrible gambler, would leave a card table and kind of ashamedly say to Eddie, like, I lost a lot of money. And Eddie would be like, how much did you lose, Joe? And Joe would kind of tell him, he'd be like, okay, get out of the way. And Eddie would sit down at the table. They'd say, he'd take his jacket off, roll up his sleeves, and be like, deal me in. And they said he'd clean the whole house out and then win more, even then Joe lost.
That's what I like to hear.
Beautiful people. Beautiful, flawed, wonderful people. But hey.
God bless Philadelphia.
Gives us all hope, you know? Just don't die of a botched tonsillectomy, folks, okay?
Yeah, right. Thanks, Bing. If you want to hear more...
We'll talk about that in another podcast. There is a huge...
The murder of Eddie Lang.
There's still... Some of the family is not over it, and... I guess rightfully so. It's sad. It stinks.
Yeah.
But you know what? His legacy lived on, and not as much as it should. But as long as we're still sitting here talking about him, I guess that's always a good sign.
That's all that matters.
Looks like your hourglass there in the background's running out of sand.
It has indeed, which means it's time to wrap up. So if you like Drew Nugent and you want to hear more of his stories and more of his wonderful music, tune into Facebook Live every Thursday through Saturday for more and more Drew.
On my personal page.
Yes, indeed. Drew, could you play us out, sir?
Oh, I certainly could.